privilege to moderate. Let me stand for a moment. I understand why everybody's standing. You can't hear me? No. Come here. There. It's on now. Can you hear me now? Okay. I now understand why everyone was standing before, because these chairs are so low that you feel like you're going to sleep. So in the this morning's first panel, I think we got a very, very fascinating window into the drivers of change in global supply chains. This session follows. The focus is much more on how firms are responding and or anticipating those changes, and very much through how they manage risk, how they pick the sweet spot between speed, flexibility, cost, and how they're managing change at the firm level. Delighted to have a great panel. We have Carlos Cordon, Lego professor from IMD, supply chain specialist. We have Charlie Fine, professor from MIT Sloan. We have Hao Li, professor from Stanford, so I think we're well represented in the academic world. We have Margie Yang, who's the CEO of the SCAL Group, who I believe runs one of the longest vertically integrated supply chains in the world. So that gives us a great start. I'm going to begin this in reverse alphabetical order. What I'd like to do is let each one make an opening statement. I hope we'll get in about 4 waves, because I know that you have lots of questions, well, a lot of discussion, so we'll have one wave kind of across the panel. Then we'll collect 3 or 4 questions, allow the panel to process those, then do another wave. And if we're really lucky, we'll make 4 waves of back and forth, so it'll be very interactive. So, Margie?
Thank you. I thought you were going to say that I'm the specimen woman and actual manufacturer. So, well, I saw the PowerPoint that was sent out, and so I'm going to start with Stan Xi's smiley curve, and where most of us would put China in the middle of the global supply chain, being the factory of the world. People attribute China's dominance in manufacturing to its abundant supply of low-cost labor. And lately, it has been very fashionable to say that because of rising labor costs, China's manufacturing sector is losing its competitiveness to other low labor cost countries such as Vietnam, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and the latest favorite is, of course, Burma or Myanmar. At SCAL, we are in the labor-intensive textile and apparel sector with over 2/3 of our workforce in China. And people often ask us, when are you moving out of China? Well, we adopt the contrarian position that we continue to invest in China and have no plans to move out, because we, in fact, believe that China's competitiveness is only beginning to show its real strength. What is critically missing in the conventional wisdom is productivity. There is a lot of room for China's textile and apparel industry, as well as other manufacturing industries that are labor intensive, to continuously raise productivity, thereby digesting the higher labor cost. The principle is simple. And the key defining factor here is competitiveness is really productivity, is unit labor cost. Despite China's success in manufacturing, when you have a really good labor force, the managers get a little bit lazy. So I would not claim that all the management skills that I learned and all the technology that I had the benefit to be exposed to has been used in our industry, which leaves a lot of opportunities for improvement. Now, it's like a fat person wanting to lose weight is a lot easier than a thin person trying to lose weight. So, take for example, the compensation system in apparel sector. It's still very much based on what Frederick Taylor thought of 100 years ago, when people were moving from rural area to urban area. So you'll notice that in a lot of the garment factories, they still pay people for showing up, because during those days, they're trying to train the workers to have that discipline. Today, why don't we give them incentive for completing work on time and not having to go on overtime. You must have heard that every garment factory has overtime incentive. So there itself is already a lot of room for improvement. Imagine the productivity gain possible with the application of information technology and now mobile computing, social media, unlimited amount of potential there. Of course, the adoption of modern management is not automatic. So there has to be a lot of work that we as managers have to do. And we should start with changing the frontline supervisors. Very often, supervisors are chosen because they are good sewers. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily good leaders and managers. Also, it is very difficult to teach, I hate to say this because 45-year-old women, this is a research that it's very difficult to teach anyone over 45, men or women, technology. So a lot of our supervisors are in fact very good, hardworking sewers who happen to be women who did not have the benefit of having an education that allows them to have the fluency of technology. So it's very difficult to implement a lot of the technology that we're trying to put in these sewing lines. So we need to upgrade to diploma holders in supervisor level. And then, as a tradition, there's always been a lot of technical experts. And that's, they're called the masters or Kung Fu masters. This is a person who is extremely valuable, but while you're trying to, what we're trying to do is to de-skill, and so what we're trying to do is to learn from these people, learn from the Kung Fu masters, and put them, make them a lot easier. So a lot of opportunity. Can we tackle it? Yes, because China has a unique, every year there are 6 million university graduates. 10% of them are engineers. This is the opportunity, and for SCAL, we have been moving around in many countries. This is the first time that we have this labor skill pool that we can draw on to totally raise, completely change the game. Years ago, we were in Singapore, and in fact, the current PM, who was then Minister of Industry, asked us to upgrade our manufacturing, change our manufacturing garment operation in Singapore. But we couldn't do it then. Now we can do it. So this is why I feel very confident that we have a lot more room. Now, as a result, that these Chinese workers with a bigger take-home pay will spend more and fueling domestic consumption, which brings me to another competitive advantage. I remember a good friend, my classmate from HBS, Philip Yo, used to say, you give me a domestic market, I can build any industry for you. In China, we have a huge domestic market. And again, this is an advantage that we never had in any other country. So that's another opportunity. And also, when you have that domestic market, you also start to strengthen all your services, including vendor management, skills, warehousing, because you're at the market. So where we have been adding a lot of service that is at the back end, which is design, product management, product development, etc. Now we can even further extend. Plus, it gives us an opportunity to go into the domestic market and sell directly. So many, many opportunities. So I'd like to stop here and just summarize again. Rising labor cost is not a bad thing. In fact, if you think about it, for the last 30 years, the whole purpose of the opening up of the Chinese economy is to have bring about economic prosperity. So now that we have reached that, it's just a matter of how to use a different skill set, a different advantage to bring the industry and hopefully can transform the industry globally so that this entry, garment industry has always been an entry-level industry, has a new future, which is that people who are in this industry will continue to gain more and more and not just lose their jobs when the place becomes more prosperous and migrate to another location. Thank you.
Thank you, Margie. Nice take on the interaction between jobs and value added that we were discussing in the previous session. And don't just look at the wage, but look at the dynamism in the production sector itself. So,
Yes, yeah. So thanks, Margie. Margie mentioned several things, and two of the points that I really like and impressed, I was impressed about is she was talking about Esquel not purely a company that makes shirts. In fact, she was talking about how the customers of Esquel would look at Esquel as a company that provide many services, the vendor management services, design services, warehousing services, and that really is a very, very powerful way to add values. I think our session title is about how adding values. She also mentioned about the fact that you have to think from the perspective of like the workers or the customers in their mind and not force a particular way of doing things to them. And I think that struck a chord with me. To me, the way to add value in the supply chain is to think about what the customers really need. And instead of selling them what you already have, is think about how to package, how to create new solutions that would serve their needs well. I'll give you several examples quickly. One is Cemex. Being a cement company, the world's third largest cement company, Cemex, based in Mexico. Of course, cement is a product, and they were selling cement, but they recognized that customers need cement because they need to build houses, they need to renovate their properties, and many of them are do-it-yourself customers. And so they created solutions for the customers. They created consulting services on how to manage a construction project management, financing. So it becomes a complete solution. Netafim, the world's one of the largest drip irrigation company. So they were selling irrigation equipment to the customers. But many of the customers, like Margie said, the 45-year-old worker, here in this case are illiterate farmers. Farmers who could not even read and could not operate a computer. So how could they manage a very sophisticated irrigation equipment controlled by the computer with semiconductor valves? And so they created solutions where they would remotely manage the irrigation for the customers. So they transformed themselves from a product-based company to a service-based company. In the US, we have a company called Intuit, a very successful software companies that mix products that are financial services, tax products. But again, they recognize that what the customers need were not the software, but to use the software so that they can file their taxes, so that they can manage their finances. So they transform themselves into managed services. So you can file taxes through Intuit. You don't need to buy their product anymore. You can just register and you can give them the data and they would file the taxes for you. And today, 40% of the company's revenue came from services. Used to be 100% product-based, selling CDs, selling software packages. So this transformation from a product-based company to a solution-based company, service-based company, I think is a powerful way to add values to the overall supply chain, just like what Margie described, what Esquel has done.
Charlie. Thank you. So good afternoon, or still good morning, perhaps. So I would like to build on the previous comments and frame it in terms of innovation, that in some sense going from a product company to a service company is a form of innovation. And I think successful innovators tend to build supply chains. So from Henry Ford onward, you have a successful innovation, you build a supply chain around it. Henry Ford built his supply chains, General Motors built their supply chains, Nokia built their supply chains, Li and Fung built their supply chains. If you innovate successfully, you build on that innovation by building a supply chain. However, when the next innovator comes along with his better innovation, then you see supply chain destruction. You see the dismantling of the Ford supply chain, the General Motors supply chain, the Nokia supply chain, because somebody else came along with a better mousetrap. So we see interesting dynamics between innovation in products and services, or innovation in a business model, successful innovations leading to the construction of a supply chain, in some sense, to take advantage of that innovation, to build on your advantage, to grow your capability, oftentimes in a very integral way, in a powerful way to leverage the advantage. But it's temporary. It doesn't last forever because somebody else is going to come along with a better mousetrap. And so I think one of the features at the micro level, if you happen to be the Nokia of the day and your supply chain is being dismantled, you might say, gee, that's not a very happy outcome. But on a global level, I think we want to celebrate, in some sense, the creative destruction that comes along with, in some sense, dismantling the old supply chains and building the new ones. What's good for the economy may not be good for the individual entrepreneur, and then you get issues of, well, how do you recycle productively the human skills, the human capital, when you have the destruction of supply chains? And I think that's where, in some sense, the micro meets the macro, where we need sometimes perhaps government policies to help with the retraining, with help with the recovery periods when you have the supply chain destruction that comes with creative destruction in product and service markets. So I think we have to think deeply about the connection between supply chains and about innovation. We want to celebrate innovation. We benefit from innovation, but we have to recognize that innovation has its downsides as well, which is the need to repurpose the assets and the capabilities into new supply chains. Not always easy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move a little bit forward and go to the second part of the title, which is about risks. Why I want to talk about risk, it was in the conversation previously about that. I would say that there is, in the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen a change, a qualitative change in where companies are going. Basically, I always say, in 2008, the automotive industry in the US committed collective suicide. They went bankrupt, and the first thing that they did was to bankrupt their suppliers. So the whole chain was bankrupt. It was some comments about the unfortunate earthquake in Japan, and that started a totally new thinking in many companies. I remember a company like Philips, the first time that the whole board was meeting every week with some of the top management with one question: how many millions in sales are we losing because of the Japanese earthquake? And for the first time, companies were looking at not just the immediate suppliers, but suppliers of suppliers and so on. So there, and I remember Apple, another one that announced that they had a $36 billion war chest when the Japanese earthquake happened to buy components. So for the first time, a lot of companies are starting to look very deep in the whole chain. Then two things are happening. I would say one is that because the risk starts to be so high, many companies are thinking about insourcing. So we have seen a lot of trend in the 90s and the 2000s about outsourcing. Now we see both of them at the same time. Before it was referred as controlling the supply chain, when it's interesting, the chairman from Nestle saying, we want to control that. Somebody said, it was Lenin who said, trust is good, but control is better. So what you try to do is actually to control that, and you see a lot of this happening. The other thing that we see happening also, I think, is nearshoring. There was a lot of talk about offshoring. We saw that about nearshoring is not only because of that, it's also because the effects of the disruptions is creating such an effect. I won't mention which company, but some companies already 2-4 years ago, they were talking about de-risking China. The idea of saying I'm an electronic company, I'm too reliant on China, is not that I don't want to work in China, is that I need to spread the risks. So I think that we see these several things happening. So there's a lot of, I would say, much more concern about risk. And the problem is that we don't understand risk very well. There has been a lot of talking about risk from a point of view of intellectually, how do we do that? But from the actual making of it, most companies say we have a very good identification and plans to minimize the risk, but we are not able to follow up. Risks change over time, and we are not able even to talk about the business risk. It was Victor Fung who was talking about forecasting and so on. That's the typical business risk that we have dealt with in operations. What we see today is that companies are saying a supply chain that we optimize, we don't know if it's going to be the right one in 1 year from now or even 6 months from now. I always mention the fact that to something like raw materials like powder milk, They go up and down 50% in value in 6 months. So a supply chain that you set up that was the right one 6 months ago now is totally wrong. So many companies are trying to control and to basically extend this control to minimize this uncertainty. In business, in general, we hate uncertainty. We want stability of prices. If you think about the last 20 years, we have been trained in an environment of stable prices. In the last 2 years, it has gone off the wall. We have no idea. And just to give you the last thing, I got a company asking me something that I thought academics we should be able to answer. There was a company producing aluminum, and a couple of years ago they told me, Carlos, how do we allocate product to customers? And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean? They say, oh, we have more demand than supply. Well, economics will tell you, raise the prices. Yeah, we did that twice already. We still have more demand than supply. So I went back to my academic papers. I found one paper, the last paper published about that, 1958. Some of you have software, SAP, and so on. There is a lot about how to supply and to satisfy demand. There is nothing about the other way around. So we are in a different world. And suppliers now are, in many cases, in the driving seat. So this idea about exceeding customer expectations, delighting customers we have always thought about, now is the idea about, well, which customers do you fire? And how do you select whom to serve? So it's a very different world.
So 4 very interesting cuts on the dynamics of the supply chain. I think the productivity point and really thinking about what's happening in the units themselves. The product to service and how that's a constant driver. Charlie's reminder of the yin and yang between innovation and the supply chain, which is going to be a large-scale change. And then Carlos with how do you re-optimize against all of these changes in the supply chain itself. So that should give us food for questions. What I'd like to do is take 3 or 4 questions, depending upon how complicated they are, and then let the panel take a shot at those, and then we'll do that round another 1 or 2 times. So questions, comments from the audience? No one? I'm sure the panel can continue, but there must be something out of one of these 4 pieces of the dynamics of the supply chain. Yes?
We have a question with regards to the last.
The microphone's coming.
My name is Jerry Matthews from Bain & Company. With regards to the last point about insourcing, do you also see companies and organizations bringing the make versus buy decisions back up onto the surface again? Because we've seen those going, very much extreme to the buy in the last couple of decades. Do you think these sort of decisions coming a lot more into on the table right now? We're making investments decisions, and as a result, also going a lot more vertical integration. What's your view on that, or the panel?
Okay, so we'll save that. We'll get that in a couple more.
Great.
But is there a changing balance, coming back to thinking about the make and not
Yes.
always just buy?
Exactly,
Excellent.
exactly.
We'll give the panel time to think about that one. Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much for the very engaging comments. I'm Leonie Fung from Janker Partners. I was struck by the difference in view shared by Marjorie on, keeping production in China, because it seemed to contrast with the view shared by the previous panel where Dr. Fung was talking about production, some companies moving production away from China to OECD countries. I was trying to get more color as to why the differences in views, or maybe I'm missing some nuances. Maybe both panels have the same view, but it's just some nuances that I'm missing. Thank you.
Okay, so more color on the question of is China here to stay in a sense? As
and also, as we read, labor costs are increasing as much as 30-40% each year. How can that be sustained in terms of China being, having the benefits of lower production compared to other regions? Thanks.
Let's take one more, and then we'll run it up and down the panel. So one more, yeah, up here, second row, or Patrick.
It's Patrick Steinem from Bank of America. I haven't heard the word globalizing in any of your speeches, maybe because it's an old thing. So let me ask the opposite, localizing a supply chain in China. For example, we will see a development of 2 sorts of supply chains, the global OEM to become local and bring their suppliers, and the the local OEMs who have their local suppliers? What do you see in differences evolving in this localization development?
Okay, so completing the loop back to China and who's going to do it and how. Will it be the outsiders who come back or the Chinese who go forward? So we've got three interesting questions. Who wants to begin? You can volunteer. You can pick on one of those. Volunteer. Okay.
Can we get rid of all the Li and Fung people in this room?
They can just cover their ears. No.
Hey, Li and Fung is my biggest customer. Have to be very, very careful, very tactful. So, because I don't want to disagree with Victor. I agree with, so let me start by saying I agree with Victor, but let me just add another, a little slightly different possible option. The make versus buy. We have Don started by saying that we have a very long supply chain, and one of the reasons is that we have a lot of opportunity for innovation. As Hao Li says, we're actually not just in the business of manufacturing, we're in the service business. In fact, for Escal, a lot of our value add is in service. So what do? Now, Hugo Boss came to us and said, we want you to design a very classical looking men's knit shirt in black. Okay, that's a tricky one. But we're a spinner. Because we're a spinner, we've got expertise who said, change the twist in the yarn. Now, we made the special yarn. The very classic cut black knit shirt has a totally different feel. So if you're making the opportunities for the ability to innovate is a lot greater, because the permutations, you understand the permutations and possibilities in the whole process a lot better than if you're buying. And I think that is because, and that's I think why Li and Fung uses us so much, is because they're not using us just to make the product. They're using us from, to develop a lot of products. That's why a lot of customers are now coming to us. And I think in the U.S., this is, when the U.S. is bringing back manufacturing to the U.S., I think a lot of it is driven by the fact that you need some manufacturing to have innovation. So an in-depth understanding, and some of it, there are two kinds of innovation. One comes from a broad sweep, a change in the macro environment or in the technology. Another kind of innovation, it comes from an in-depth understanding of the process. So this is an opportunity. You have to be sitting on top of it to be able to come up with that kind of innovation. So that's my answer.
Great.
I think to answer the question about make, buy, and whether we should continue to manufacture in China or localizing the supply chain, one thought that I want to add to the table is that oftentimes some innovative companies have found that they can decompose the process, decompose the complete supply chain process, and some process steps may stay in China and some do not have to stay in China. Some process steps we still retain in-house and some we can do outsource. Some will do nearshore and some will offshore. So I think that that answer to the question of whether we do make buy or in-house, offshore, or onshore, it's not a simple answer, because you can innovate through process decomposition. That's what Hewlett-Packard has been doing. Hewlett-Packard's printers used to be manufactured in China, and then they customize and localize the product, and they discover that the cost of China is rising, and the container freight cost is rising, and the tariffs are rising. So what they did is that they also do not want to leave China, because China is still most productive and have the manufacturing know-how. So what they did is they manufactured the core products in China, and then they customized, postponed and customized the product now in Eastern Europe for the European market, and then they do the nearshoring, as as Carlos has mentioned, of customizing the product in Mexico, Guadalajara, for North America. So in that sense, they're using a combination approach. They're neither leaving China nor staying in China. So, but they leave the core manufacturing in China, and then the customization step near shore. So I think this may be something to think about, is to not look at that as a 0-1 decision or yes-no decision, but a clever combination solution may be the one that would be most effective.